Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. A bit of an unusual background for today, a sack of potatoes, but that's because what we're going to be talking about, communism in more detail as it is perceived, involved the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. And a lot of what they're famous for involved potatoes. They were feeding their population potatoes, they were making vodka out of potatoes. It was quintessentially Soviet to have anything to do with potatoes. So that's going to be the background for today. Speaking of socialism, when you get on the internet, you find all sorts of opinions on any economic situation that you like. Socialism and communism have always been the red-headed stepchild of the economic world. Now, to be clear, Silverlight is not socialist nor communist. Silverlight is a student, always learning. So it's necessary to take time out and look at the stories and the narratives that are being offered. I've read Karl Marx, I've read Friedrich Engels, I've read a whole lot of different stuff, which gives me a unique perspective. I'm not just whistling Dixie. I'm someone that tries to dig in and do the research. And this is where one of the most common tropes I hear on some of the more virulently right end of the spectrum websites is that socialism and communism are leftist, liberal, Jewish conspiracy. I find this particularly troubling. Okay, let's look at those words. Leftist. There's this whole false dichotomy that rightist, well, what it's supposed to be is right is government control and, everything is harshly regulated. Left is complete freedom, anarchy, etc. The way it's interpreted nowadays is that the conservatives are on the right and the liberals are on the left. And keep in mind, conservatives and liberals are centrist parties. There's nobody that really takes a far line away from the centrist spectrum, because that's how you get votes. But in a one-party state like the Union of Soviet Social Republics, present-day China, present-day Vietnam, the list goes on, things are different. And as I said in Communism number 1, a single-party state is a dictatorship. It's closer to National Socialism, which is Nazism. Now, this whole idea of Nazism is wrapped up part and parcel with socialism. The Nazis started off as the National Socialist Party, but they were very right-wing. They were very controlled, and you could ask any one of them, they were out there to hunt down and get rid of the communists. Why they had socialist in their title, I'm not sure. It was probably a buzzword they cooked up. They were meeting in a beer hall, maybe it was even an in-joke. But that's how far back this propaganda goes. The 1930s, even the 1920s, that communism was a Jewish conspiracy. Now, why Jewish? I've puzzled over this for a long time. Because if you look at Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, Karl Marx's family was Jewish, but they converted to Christianity before he was born. It takes a real amount of mental gymnastics to say that he would adhere to something that was changed before he was even born. And if Karl Marx was a Christian, Friedrich Engels was Protestant, a proud Protestant. Now, eventually they would declare they were both atheists and not part of any religion whatsoever. They established socialism and communism with the famous quote, "Religion is the opiate of the masses." And it's true, religion offers a lot of benefits to a lot of people. It also has some significant baggage, but they were so convinced of this that they made it one of their fundamental tenets of socialism. So then let's go to the first successful revolution. There were some revolutions in the 1860s that tried to overthrow European houses and install communist governments. But the first really successful one was in Russia, and it formed the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. If you look at the people involved, you have Lenin, Stalin, and Trotsky. Lenin was not Jewish. Again, his great aunt or grandmother, he was like 1/4 Jewish, but he was absolutely not practicing, nothing like that. He was a Christian nominally, and he rejected all religion. Stalin, Georgian, conservative, Orthodox, Christian. The only one of the bunch that is truly Jewish was Trotsky, and he was hounded out of almost every country until he was stabbed with an ice pick in Mexico. So this whole bundling it up together with a Jewish identity is just the work of somebody trying to label it with every bad thing that they can imagine. Now, who would have had that motivation? Well, it's the National Socialists, led by the short man with the mustache who liked to give the high-handed salute. The German experience of socialism was very different. There was a woman named Rosa Luxemburg who was astonishingly gifted for her time, despite the nominal status of women in that era. She was leading a socialist revolution in Berlin itself. And they were able to hold on to power pretty much until the Weimar Republic was established. And then she was murdered. So this idea of socialism having a Jewish influence is literal propaganda from the Nazi Party. And it's still being repeated today in 2021 on websites. I'm not going to mention their names, but those of you who know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. So this fear of communism and socialism, the idea that the common people have power and have value, is a 1930 Nazi elitist idea. Now, as I said in my other episode, the elites have always been afraid of letting the regular people have power, the regular folks. And communism promises power to the people. It's literally one of its slogans, power to the people. Today, we always talk about we need everybody to stand up together. We need to come together as one, unite, and enact reform. But the problem is, most of the population out there is happy so long as they have some food to put in their belly, a little something to drink, and some TV to watch. Until we can break through that, there's not very many people that are, quote, woke, end quote. Speaking of woke, I don't think I've ever mentioned how much I hate that term. If you're using the term woke, you really don't know what's going on. Sure, you know a little bit more than the average person, but you're just beginning to understand things. People with any understanding whatsoever would never use the term woke, because we didn't wake up. We just realized we pulled a string and it keeps going, and every day it gets longer and longer, and we'll never reach the end of it. Silverlight is still studying and finding things out to this very day. I've discovered a lot of things, so get ready for a lot of episodes. Back to the communist socialist paradigm. So we've disproved that it's not a leftist rightist argument. We've shown that it's not a Jewish conspiracy. And by the way, the USSR would not promote you if you were Jewish. Like if you were in the army, you could get to maybe the rank of captain, but that would be as far as you could get. In civilian life, you could get a desk job, but you weren't going to become management. The USSR was, for all intents and purposes, a mirror of Nazi Germany. One man in control, controlling the whole economy, and letting his own prejudices run everything. Jews were persecuted in both. Now, in Russia, the USSR had the Holodomor, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, where they tried to starve the Ukrainians off their land. Now, if you'll notice, we're here in 2021 and Russia and Ukraine are still having problems. So Russia is no stranger to prejudice. I mean, the plights of the LGBTQ community in Russia is staggering. And honestly, I don't know how anybody would sort it out. We have protesters over here all the time that are saying we're unfair to the community, we don't let women have rights, etc. But we're leaps and bounds over what's happening over there. Whether it's Russia, whether it's China, and back in the days of the USSR, forget it. Women were valued because they could produce commodities, but the same token, everybody was basically a single cog in the giant machine. That is completely not what communism and socialism stand for. Again, power to the people, not power to the person. Stalin took the phrase "from each according to ability to each according to need" and turned it around to "from each according to ability to each according to work." This means he was always trying to find ways for people to be working. And the old stories about people being sent to gulags and worked to death are unfortunately very true. But remember, Stalin really does not represent a communist in any way, shape, or form. He kind of got lucky because he built his power behind the scenes and Lenin got sick at a very young age. So when we see the USSR, okay, Lenin was no saint. He had a lot of warts on him, but Stalin coming after him was just a terrorist, a dictator, one of the worst of the worst. They probably still don't even know half the people that he eliminated. But as I've often said with North Korea, which calls itself the oh my god, the Democratic Republic of Korea, we know they're not democratic. And in the same way, the USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, they were not socialist in any way. They had Soviets. A Soviet was like a committee. So there would be Soviets in charge of planning this and planning that. And that would be your ultimate goal, would be to get elected onto a Soviet. And that would be how you could get onto your start to power. What we were saying last episode applies here. Unlike our politicians that are busy cajoling each other for more money, because with more money you can buy more power and vice versa, power and money can be exchanged for one another. And of course, fame can be used to buy money and power. In the Soviet system, there was still politics. Just money was less of a factor. People got used to the fact that money was there, but it wasn't the deciding factor. They used to have lineups to be able to go in and buy bread, buy a carpet, buy a car, whatever it would be. You would be paid your salary, and that's what you would get. But the USSR tried very hard to close themselves off from the rest of the world. Rubles were not allowed to be sold on the world money exchange. Theoretically, they often wound up there, but it was a non-tradable currency. It was Russian currency for Russian people. Now, of course, this didn't happen that way. American dollars have always been a great standard. British pounds have always been a great standard. You walk into pretty much any country in the world and you can buy something using those currencies and the locals will take them. That's always been the truth, and it probably will be the truth for a long time yet to come. But the Soviet Union's economy was actually very successful because Lenin and Stalin, Lenin started it, Stalin continued it, they took the country from an industrial backwater where growing potatoes was pretty much what everybody did, to an industrial power, to a nuclear power, to a space power in an unbelievably short period of time. and during a very difficult time when you have the aftermath of one war, the beginning of another one, and all the devastation that you're causing yourself as a leader. They may have made the trains run on time, but they did so by paving the railway with blood. Socialism and communism have nothing to do with Russia. They have nothing to do with almost any of the parties in the world today. Korea, not socialist, not communist. China, not socialist, not communist. They're just buzzwords used to keep the people in line, keep the people in check. And of course, by having an attractive ideology, by saying we're going to make the world better for the people, heck yeah, who's not going to sign on for that? If I knocked on your front door and I said, hey, I'm here to make your life better, just sign here and you'll be one of my new commissioners, you're going to say, sure. You just don't know when I have commissioners, that's my title for people who are going to be sweeping the streets and shoveling the snow and doing all that sort of stuff. It's easy to lie to people. And unfortunately, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels came up with a not bad economic theory. I think, honestly, it needs to be revisited, but too many people are slavishly devoting themselves to this idea that you plan the economy, or you need to have total anarchy and have the people organize themselves. No, in the modern day, even God forbid, a solar flare hit us or an EMP device went off and we lost a lot of our available technology, people would still need some form of leadership. There's natural leaders in the community, there's people who are able to do things, but you're just going to wind up with factionalism. So you need to come to some sort of hybrid between communism and a liberal government that is able to say, let's keep the freedom of the people, give the power to them, but we also represent them. And it's a nearly impossible task. You would have to have a string of very rational, self-aware people who are going to say, okay, this is what needs to be done by the federal government, this is what needs to be done by the provincial or state, whatever you have, and this is what needs to be done by the municipality, and everything else needs to be done by the individual. I've said before, certain things the government is better at doing. When it comes to healthcare, the government's better at doing it because they're the ones that are going to look 5-10 years in the future and figure, okay, we know a lot of people are turning 70 and 80, so we need to have long-term care facilities. When it comes to building infrastructure, governments are better at it because they know we need to attract business and encourage people to have business. So we need to have buses so that workers can get there and people can go there to shop. We need to have power lines set up. We need to have high-speed internet. We need to have all this in place. And when all is said and done, that's a planning committee's job. That's something that communism and socialism don't have any provision for. They just think that you, me, and 10 of our best friends are going to figure we want to build our potato farm. We have some great land, fantastic, but who's going to build the power lines coming out? Who's going to build the road coming out? Who's going to build all those? Who's going to maintain the sewers and waterways and stuff like that? It depends kind of on infrastructure already being there. And that's where traditionally socialism and communism have failed, because they appeal to countries where the people are impoverished. Now, North America and the Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries are definitely becoming more and more impoverished. We're not at the state that I think we would accept any form of socialism. At the same token, we have this huge pressure on us that socialism and communism are bad. I mean, this Nazi ideology is the exact reason why people don't trust unions, because, unions, they're all corrupt. They're treated in the same way as these one-party dictatorships were treated. And it's true, unions have become corrupt, although I've dealt with them as a manager. I've never had a problem working with a union because the best part about a union, they publish their rules. And management publishes their rules. It's an agreement. And the best way that you can work with your employees is to know the agreement. Too many managers don't read the agreement, and that's the union is always going blah, 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 blah. No. You read that agreement, and you get to know the important sections. There's certain things that come up all the time. In almost every job I've ever been in, with or without a union, I'm sure everybody out there has had this. One way or another, you have one employee that doesn't want to do a particular job. And that can apply to any industry. Again, sweeping the streets is not a pleasant job, so let's just pick on that. But you need to get the streets swept, and that's the person who's available at the present time. Oh, I'm going to go to the union. And then you turn around, you're able to quote the union book, page 15, section 30, subsection 3, management has the right to assign work to an employee any way that they want. Now, I was a compassionate boss. I understand everybody has a bad day, and I would try to work with somebody whenever I could. But if somebody has a bad day every week, I'm documenting it. I document everything. And that's why I never had a problem with the union, even though I was in charge of unionized employees. But too many people don't read the source material. That handbook is there for a reason. And by having so many places that are not unionized, management has been able to kind of run roughshod on employees. There's no agreements in place. It's just whatever policy management has decided on for that particular situation, and there's no collective bargaining available. That was one of the most important things in the communist and the socialist philosophy, was the idea that the people could get together and collectively bargain. Again, this idea that if we come together, we have power as the people. And this is something we need to get back. And I'm afraid unions, professional associations, places like that are the place that we need to start. So that people start learning, hey, my voice does matter. I've been in politics. I've been a campaign manager. I considered running for office a couple times and decided I just don't want to torture myself that much. So I'm coming to you not just as some academic, although I do have my degrees, but somebody who's been in the fields, I've done everything from washing cars in the winter to being an executive in charge of accounts. And, like I said, campaign manager for one of the major political parties. I'm not going to tell you which. But this is the vision that I have. And this is something that I want to keep going on about. We need to start bringing back Marx and Engels into our lives, not as an example of how things should be run perfectly, but just as an example of what we should be doing. We have to remember that we're people. Just like this is a bag of potatoes, each individual potato has an important function, or it will. This one might be a French fry, this one might be mashed, this one might go into soup, but they're all going to come together and serve the same purpose of making sure my family doesn't go hungry. You have a bag of potatoes too. Maybe it's even the same color, maybe it's even the same brand. Maybe not, but that's the thing. It's a bag of potatoes. The potatoes have come together and they've formed something new. This bag of potatoes don't grow in nature, but potatoes do. Humans grow individually, and when they come together, they're one of the most powerful things possible. Now the question is, how can we give power to the people, make an equitable system that takes care of those people without trampling on rights and by making sure everything can be funded? Communism had the idea by making sure everything was fairly traded and, nobody's belly was going to go empty. This is a laudable goal. The same token, there's a lot of holes in the theory. Many nations have tried to implement some form of socialism, which pretty much amounts to them coming in, trying to make not privatize, but I hate the public making it public, because it sounds like it's available to the public, and that's not true. We have public hospitals. You can go to a public hospital at any time that you like, but you can't go in and say, hey, I want to perform the heart surgery today. It doesn't belong to you, but it's available to you. And I mean, there's nationalizing things, which, if you have an important resource, that would be something you would nationalize. But the most important resource will always be the people, because each one of us has something to contribute, no matter how small, no matter how big, whether it's just somebody tying their elastic bands in a certain way, and because of that it makes them stronger, and maybe they invent a toy out of that so kids can shoot bits of wood and make a fun game. I don't know. There's always somebody out there with a crazy idea, and people latch on to crazy ideas. So when you have a communist or a socialist system, you have to make sure that you retain that creativity, because that's what usually gets lost in the communist system, is creativity. If you know everyone's going to get paid, then why are you going to kill yourself working? There's always some people who are ambitious, and they're going to wind up in the Soviet, on the planning committee, in management, whatever you have, in academia. But a lot of other people, again, they're content to sit back, fill their bellies, and keep their minds occupied with whatever nonsense is on today. I'm going to leave it there. I think we've covered everything that we needed to in this video. And in the next one, I'm going to go into why the Soviet system collapsed. Because it's important. Because it's going to bring us back into how the citizens survived during the collapse, and the fact they were working while the system was collapsed, not getting paid. They were still driving their buses, they were still going to the factories, and nobody was getting paid because the government had collapsed. So it's an important thing to understand. Once again, it may happen to us someday. Maybe soon, maybe late, but it's important to know that it can happen. But that's for another show. Right now, just remember, the lies about communism and socialism are just untrue. They're put together in the 1930s and the 1940s by the Nazi Party, and they're repeated by the elites who fear giving the people power. Remember, we need to find a way to empower more people, because right now everyone's happy to sit back and watch TV, and we need to get them interested and doing more than complaining about things on Facebook or YouTube. Thank you for joining us on the Silverlight Show today. If you enjoyed this show, please like, share, and subscribe. And after everything, we hope you have a fantastic day.